today we're going to have the lecture in Endgames. So we're going to work through many new and interesting ideas. Hopefully you'll learn a lot from today's lecture. We are going to have lots of fun analyzing and solving puzzles and problems. Okay, already familiar position to you, Lasker's idea. So let me just go through it really quickly, that we can switch to another idea, like to another game with the same idea. So we can call this position like differently, like elevator. How does it work? So first of all, we need to open the spot for the pawn. We are going to promote c8. Check. Again, we are not going back to c8, but we are going to another side. So trying to promote, the rook tries to stop the pawn, and then you start using your rook, giving the checks from this side. King moves up, and you move with the king up too. Again, check, and you move with the king to a7, not to c8 and not to a8. So now you see, do you see the elevator? So rook h4, giving the check, king moves to a4, king defends the pawn from b7 and prepares to promote from c8, rook b2 check, and now king moves to a6, again elevator. Rook returns back to c2, rook a4, rook h4 check, king a3. Probably most of you already know the idea from this moment. Got the main idea that we're going to sacrifice on h2. Elevator, the same scheme, then check, and then rook takes h2, distracting the main piece that protects c8 square. So, and now we are going to another position with the same idea. Two great players played this game. So that was the real game. Petrosyan played against Karpov. So Karpov was black. And look at the position. So white pawns are going to promote the pawn on f6, the pawn on h5, and the rook controls the pawn on c2. So do you think that black will promote the pawn? Who thinks that black will promote the pawn? Raise your hands. Raise your hands. But now let's think about the next move. The king is under attack. So we have to figure out where we're moving the king. Either we're staying like on the same line on A. Well, basically, we do not have any choice. We have to stay on the A file. But the question is A6 or A8. If we move to A6, what happens? So H6, excuse me, H6. So if the king moves to H6, Jonathan? Right. What's your name? Excuse me?
Azim.
Azim.
Yes.
My name is Anna.
Pleased to meet you.
Okay, so Azim is right. C7. Try to recall the Lasker's idea. If I play here, then you just move the pawn, and the king takes. Do we have the reversed Lasker's idea, like in the previous position? And we go with the same line. Again, elevator, exactly the same that we have reviewed in the previous position. So let us return back. Again, so when king moves to h6, we push the pawn to f7. If the king takes on h5, what happens? King to b7, right? Would you like to see it on the board, right? So if the king takes, Jonathan, your move. King g7, king h7, rook c5, and again elevator, right? By playing king to h7, black tries to postpone this elevator. So the next move is h6, and if the king takes, again elevator. Try to use this idea, because when you play the game and use the already familiar idea, then it's really easy because you know to which position you are going to approach, which position you want to get. That is why we'll learn all those ideas. Okay, so if the king moves to h8, Jimmy?
King E8.
Check. Sean?
King to
You mean back?
F8. Yeah. Or I'd say rook to C8. No, I mean for what? King to E7.
Not easy. I told you, rook endgames are the most complicated among all the endgames. Though you know the idea, still, there are so many complications that you can face. Where does king move?
This point is bad for white. Well, no.
If you move here, I give a check back. If you move to c file, then I promote. Let's return back and think. So that is the position that we got, right? So the goal is to promote c8, promote f8 pawn, and not to allow our opponent to promote to c1. Sean?
H7.
If I take? Okay, and now let's talk about the previous position. Jonathan, do you remember when we started previous position? I told that king, it was reversed, so king to a7 was brilliant draw. So here, most likely, it will be hard for white to promote the pawn. Let's try. Let's try to prove that king h7 works. Raise your hands, who wants to tell the move.
Is it black's move or is white's move?
White's move, white's move.
Rook to C8.
Rook to c6, tricky. If I move the king, I will be just checkmated. If I move the rook, you will take the pawn, right? Okay. What if I move the rook here? Sean, go ahead with your variation. Let's take here, right? And then how are you going to defend from the side checks? Check. Impossible, right? Because the king is too close, so once you're moving your king too far, then the king comes here and the king blocks everything. So the king is cut from the 6th rank, you will never approach the pawn. So most likely king h7 works, as we saw in the example. Instead of h7, any other ideas that you may have?
To C3.
Let's see.
Oh, C3.
Oh, excuse me. Rook to c3. If I return back with the king to h7,
Right
so
there.
let's start from the very beginning to make sure that we're in the right place. So the king was under attack. We analyzed the line king to h6. King h8 was played in the game. Here, king moves here. We analyzed the king. If the king takes on h6, then what happens?
G8.
And how is it called? Jimmy?
The elevator.
The elevator or Lasker's idea, right? So we were stuck at king h8, by the way. So still white to play.
So why not the king to e8?
Let's try. I give the check.
So block with the rook.
So if you block with the rook, I move to here, to f1. You cannot promote because I take, you take, and I will promote. So you have to go back and to control the pawn. I return back with a check. If you move here, I'll move back. If you take on c2, I take on f7, and it's draw. So you have to do something. So, well, I cannot find any winning continuation. So maybe this also brings draw. Let us see how Karpov played here. He played king to h8, f7. So this is logical, right? That the pawn tries to promote. King to rook to a1. Look at this move. So rook doesn't move to any other place but exactly to a1. King to e7. King opens the spot to the pawn by trying to promote. Check. If the king moves back, then the rook moves to a1. King to c6. Check back. And the king, finally the king is happy. He's in a safe place, no checks, and you see the threat, right? Do you see? Checkmate from f8, checkmate from c8. Completely lost? Or maybe we have some defense? Jonathan? What defense do we have here? Yeah, again, logical. But I take. If you take checkmate from f8, James? Excuse me, tell me your name, please. Jensen, sorry. Jensen and Azim. Jensen. Do you have any ideas here? Azim?
It's for black's move.
Of course, black to play. If it was white to play, then just f8, check, and just losing. If the rook takes on c1, first of all, let's figure out what's going on here.
The only thing black can do is rook to g6.
Rook to g6, Azim, you're right. And what is this? Jimmy?
That's a stalemate.
It's a stalemate. So that was the goal. So first opportunity, that was like, what was white trying to use? The elevator, and black's goal was trying to get into the stalemate. I think that was a kind of complicated one, right? And we are going to another topic. So we are opening the bishop's endgames. Look at these bishops. What can you tell me about them, Jonathan? Opposite colors bishops. What do you guys know about opposite colors bishops?
Very girlish.
that fairly often these endgames, they end up in draw. But look at this position. I'm going to beat you with black. I have 2 extra pawns. I'm going to bring my king and just to push the pawns. Your goal is to make the draw. So now you're going to use your pieces of paper and write down how you're going to make the draw with white. What is the merit of of opposite colors bishops when you have? That your opponent's bishop cannot control the same squares that you can control. You see? So fortress is controlling the squares in front of the opposite side's pawns that your opponent cannot control. You see? You will understand it once you see the end in position. But I cannot tell you the solution, sorry. This is the puzzle, you have to work on it. Jonathan, tell us the first move.
C5.
C5. Can you believe we're going to give up one more pawn? Why are we going to give up this pawn? Sean? Do we really need this pawn when our opponent is going to win us on the king side? Do we really need this pawn? We have to use the advantage that the opponent's king is too far from the pawn, from the king side pawns. Of course, bishop takes.
Bishop to B3.
Bishop to b3, exactly. We are going to force the opponent to push the pawn from e6 to e5. And now, do you see the structure of the fortress? Where are we going to place our king and where are we going to place our bishop? This is really important. Please?
King e4 and bishop eventually on.
You can start with the bishop, but it doesn't really matter. So the king will be placed on e4 and the bishop will be placed on g4 or on f5, any other square on this diagonal. Isn't it funny? Right? So now you know what fortress means. Like from the first glance, black was winning, but after sacrificing the pawn, you got to the position where black can do nothing. And do not forget to place your king on e4, because if you place your bishop on e4, then you will give slight chances to your opponent. So in this position, you have everything settled down, and it's good for you. Are you ready to move to more complicated positions? Opposite colors, bishops and 2 pawns. What do you know about these positions? Have you met them before? Maybe you met them in your own games. No? So Azim, what do you think about this?
White to move.
Overall, tell me about these type of positions. What do you think? Without moving the pieces. What is the plan? What is the plan? So you play with white pieces, guys. And of course, your opponent wants to sacrifice his bishop for your 2 pawns and to get to the drawish position, because everybody knows that the bishop and the king cannot win against the sole king, right? So this is my goal. I want to sacrifice my bishop for 2 pawns and will be happy with the draw. But I assume you do not want the draw. What is your plan? How are you going to beat me? But if you place your pawns on the dark squares, then I will place my king and the bishop on the light squares and just block them. And then it will be draw. Be careful with that, because you want to make it secure to place the pawns on the opposite color squares, right? But this is different. You want to check me from g5. This is what you want to do. And then to push your pawn to e6, to approach with the king to e5, and then with the help of the king and the bishop to move forward. Let us imagine that we are playing with black and we have to make the draw. What do you think? How can we do that? Now, since you know that I'm going to check you from g5 if I'm white and you're black, and then to push e6, what do you have to do with your bishop? Think about e6 square, Jonathan. So we need to protect e6. So once white moves the pawn to e6, we just sacrifice the bishop for both pawns. What we're going to do. So this position is good for both sides to learn it, how to try to win with white and how to make the draw with black when you're with the playing for the weaker side. So you got it, right? Bishop g5 check and then e6. This is the winning plan. In order to make the draw, we need to protect e6. We can protect e6 from which squares here? Shan? From which squares can we protect e6? Okay, and
B3.
bishop to b3. Right. Let us calculate first bishop to b3. Okay? I play with white, you play with black. Bishop g5 check.
King to B7. Bishop to D6.
Excuse me, bishop where?
To D6.
You
No,
can you
sorry,
cannot move
D6, I'm sorry.
to e6. I will just capture the bishop with a pawn. You're not giving the bishop for 2 pawns here.
Oh, okay.
This is your goal. You want to trade your bishop for 2 pawns, and then it will be draw. Play with black. You're trying to defend. So you first we chose bishop b3. We want to figure out what we're going to do. Go ahead, Jimmy.
You can go back to G8.
Bishop g8. Right. So if I move with the king to the queen side, you just keep your bishop on this diagonal and do not move the king. This is very important. But I have another idea. Once you move your king to d7, I move to f4, then I move to g4, then I move to h5. So this is my idea. Play with white. Play with black. Jonathan?
Bishop G8.
Bishop g8. I see your trick already. I see your trick. Because you want to play bishop f7 when I approach. Now bishop f7, right? I move here. So king was on h4 and you move. You have to move bishop g8. And then I move the king. If you leave the bishop on this diagonal and move to e8, then just e6. Once I play e6, I'm winning. Or you are winning if you're white. So returning back to this position. The drawish line is bishop moves to d7. Why is it draw? Jonathan.
The king can't make protection of F5.
Right, because the pawn on f5 will be unprotected. But you have to keep the position in that way that the pawn will be protected. And we want to move with the king to help the pawn from e5 to be promoted to e6. But once you place the bishop to d7, it's really hard to do that. Only if black removes the bishop from c8, h3 diagonal. I give you the check. Go ahead, Azim.
King to F7.
King to f7. Again, another rule that you have to memorize. You have to keep the king and the bishop both controlling which square, who knows? E6. Once you move your king to f8, e8, then what happens? E6. And then I approach my king to e5, and then it will help my pawns to promote. I cannot play king to d4, right? If I play king to f4, your move, Jimmy?
Bishop C8.
Bishop c8, you need to control e6. If I move here, Sean?
Bishop D7.
Bishop d7. So you see, it's really complicated to do something. Memorize. When the pawns are on the 5th rank, or when it's opposite, when they are on the 4th rank, when you play with black, you can stop the pawns by placing both the king and the bishop on the 7th rank. But again, another important thing that you have to know: place the bishop attacking the pawn. If you place the king and the bishop vice versa, then it will be more complicated to stop it. Do you remember our previous position with the bishop from b3 moving to f7? So bishop b3, I gave you the check, the king moved to d7, and I moved to f4. This is the opposite position, right? But still, I want the tempo. Here e6 goes. If you move bishop g8, then I move king to h4, and I'm winning the tempo, and I'm approaching to the pawns. Okay, with this it's clear. With the pawns on the 5th or on the 4th, it's easier to make the draw. Now we are going to the next position. Look at this position. Let's compare it to the previous position. What changed? John? Oh, Sean, sorry.
Sorry, the pawns are on the 6th rank.
Mm-hmm. The pawns are on the 6th rank, and that means that black has less space. Am I right? So when the pawns were on the 5th, black had more space and one extra file where to move the pieces. But here, is it still possible to make the draw? Azim, what do you think?
I think so.
Let's try to prove.
Bishop to D8.
Okay, Azim plays with black, Jonathan plays with white. I will move the pieces.
All right.
So Azim, bishop
D8.
d8. Jonathan,
Bishop B5.
Azim, the only move, right? King f8.
Bishop D7.
Yeah.
You see, it's really hard to make a draw, but check. So Jonathan got the idea. He's right, because you do not have the 9th rank, right, where to step with the bishop. So king f5. Azim,
Bishop to D6.
Jonathan, I think you should have started from the other side, because this side where you place the bishop belongs to which piece? To the king, not to the bishop. So in this position, I think Azim found the way how to trick you and to make the draw. Of course, you can start over and change it, but you're losing the time. So let's return back to what we had here and to this position. So Azim tried to make the draw, and I think he found a good idea once you made a mistake. What if you start with this move? King moves here. King f5. And now, guys, what's happening, Jimmy? What's happening with the e7 square?
Black is going to lose control of the
And this is the worst thing that can happen for black. Black has to move with the bishop or with the king. We know that with the king it's losing, but with the bishop we do not have 9th rank. Like, we cannot extend the board. That's why we have to move the bishop away here, and then e7 and the queen. Let us try to do something from maybe bishop c3. Sean, you play with white now. Mm-hmm.
King to D5.
Thank you for the draw.
Okay.
Yes, made the draw in the losing position. Do you remember the queen against the rook?
Yeah.
Did you make the last move?
I'm sorry?
Did you make the last move when I made the draw? No?
No.
No? Somebody else? But I was so happy. Okay, Shan.
Okay.
Another attempt.
King to F5.
King to F5, okay. Okay, how can I protect bishop b4? I have to go there. Jimmy?
I think you have to bring the bishop back. It's, I'm sorry, I've lost, who it is.
Mike's was right.
Wow, where to play? I'm playing for black. I'm trying to make a draw. So you guys trying to win me. Okay, Jimmy, your move. Quickly, everybody's waiting.
Bishop, bishop b5. This is the way I play.
Sorry, just oh here. Jonathan,
King G6.
King g6, and I think you're approaching to f7, right?
Correct.
And then e7. Okay, so I'm not moving to d8. I'm moving to f8. Azim.
King to
To be honest, I think it's easy, right? Easy winning. You just need to find the route of the king. Do you remember the first time when we played with the bishop to b4, I think? And we were messed up with this with bishop b5. Jonathan, do you remember your variation when you gave the check from b5? So here, what is the idea? How we're going to move the king? It's understandable. If we move to g6, are we going to win? If we move to g6 with the king?
no,
No, because the bishop stays where?
on that diagonal.
On the diagonal a3, f8, right? So this means that we need to move the king where?
To the other side.
To the queen side, right? How are we going to do that? If we move the king to e5, who knows what happens?
Check.
The check, and then we have to move back to f5 to protect that pawn on f6. But that pawn is precious. We cannot lose any pawn here. If we lose the pawn, we're losing. What is the route of the king, Shan?
King G. No, I was gonna say King G6.
No, king g6, bishop a3. We already realized that. So Azim,
Wasn't paying attention.
king to e4. And what is interesting? I cannot attack your pawn on f6. Why can't I attack?
Check.
Because of e7 and e8 promotion. I have to stay on this diagonal. I cannot move my king because of e7, and I cannot move my bishop from this diagonal. So your move, Jimmy.
King d5.
King d5. I move back. I have no choice. Jonathan. King c6. Oh, I'm so happy I can move the king. Will it help me? Sean?
King to C7.
King to c7, return back, and I think it's easy. You guys are already at the goal. Okay, who's next? Who wants to tell me the move? Raise your hand.
King.
Azim.
King d8.
King d8, you give me this check, but king d7. I think we can play king d7 right away. And then I don't see any defense against e7 pawn. And we are winning. So remember, when the pawns are on the 6th rank, we are doing what? Draw or win?
Winning.
We are winning. But again, if you're playing with the sides that lacks 2 pawns, you have to try all your possibilities to make the draw. Do not resign, okay? So though you know that this is losing, never resign. Try to use some possibilities and check your opponent whether he knows that he's winning. Fairly often your opponent doesn't know that he's winning. He tries the wrong route. Okay, and we go into the next position. Another rule that you're going to learn. What do you think about this position, Sean? Is it draw, winning, and try to prove?
A possible stalemate or
Stalemate, that's a good idea,
yeah.
because we are dealing with a corner. And when the king is in the corner, stalemate can be possible. So how can we do that? So in this position, I will let you play with black. I will try to beat you with white, okay? So let's start. Jimmy, your first move.
Let's see. I'm black, right?
Yes, you guys are black. Try to make draw. Okay.
Okay, bishop f8.
Bishop f8. Okay, I play here. Azim?
I think we stop there.
Don't forget about the check. Bishop
Right.
e7 check. So if I move here, you return back with the bishop, right? I go back, you give the check. So I basically have to go back, but instead of moving the king, I will try to move what?
Bishop h.
I'll try to move the bishop. If I move here, what is your next move, Jonathan?
Take on h6.
You take on h6. So another new idea. Stalemate idea works when the bishop controls the g8 square, so next to the king. Then it works. So after bishop h6, it's draw. I cannot move to this diagonal, so I stay on my own diagonal where I was. Your move. Can you take on h6? No, because once you take on h6, king takes, and then king g8, bishop d5 check, and then promotion of the pawn g7. If you move somewhere else with bishop to d6, then promotion. Let's return back to the original position.
Bishop b2.
Bishop b2. I see your idea. If I move the king, you have the chance to check me and to force my king to return back. Then you move back. But we have to analyze this move here, because you cannot take on h6 once your bishop is on b2. So I can move my bishop to the main diagonal. Go ahead, Jonathan, your move. Bishop c3, okay. If I move to g5, you give me the check, right? So I move to g4. I need to make this route. So you already know that when you move the king to the opposite side, you have to eliminate the squares of the opponent's bishop, right? Because if you play to g5 in this position, you will be under attack and you will have to return back. The same was with the position, do you remember the previous one, f6 and e6 pawns, and with the e5 square, so you have to eliminate that. So I moved to g4. My idea is to come closer to the pawns. And you have to stay on this diagonal. You cannot move anywhere, right? Because I will play g7 and g8 queen. So, Sean, your next move.
okay. And I am, what color am I? Am I
You're black. You all are black. So I'm trying to win against you, and you're trying to make the draw. So you have to stay with the bishop on this diagonal. Just stay here.
Bishop to
Azim?
You can't do anything but stay on the diagonal.
Stand the diagonal. Okay, let us play here. Play here. If you attack, g7, king h7, and then king to d7 or e7, right? So again, you have to stay here. The king moves to f7. Can you do anything preventing g7? So, what can we summarize from this position? With the pawns on h6 and g6, is it draw? Azim?
No.
No. White is winning. So you have to know that with black, of course you have to try to make the draw, to placing the bishop on this long diagonal, because once you placed the bishop on f8, I didn't move the bishop controlling g8, didn't allow you to make the stalemate, and then you had to leave that square, right? Because again, you do not have the 9th rank. This is what black lacks, right? Okay, with this position we are done. Let's go to the next one. Now we have more pawns on the board, and in the previous positions, what we were going to do with the weaker side, we were going to sacrifice the bishop for the 2 pawns. Am I right? Will it help you here if you sacrifice the bishop for the 2 pawns? No, because we have pawns on the queen side. That means that we have to create what? Try to recall the fortress. Try to recall the first position. Here it's more complicated. That position was really easy comparable to this position. We need to bring the king, right? If we allow the opponent to move the pawns to the 6th rank, it will be lost completely. Even on the 5th, it will be already harder to do something. So first, we cement the pawns, g4, h5, and then we're going to bring the king. King h4, king f7, g5. But still, the bishop from d1 controls h5. You move the king. What will be your plus? That your king will be more active than the opponent's king on h4. g6, and your next move? Azim? Why did we move to e6? What are we going to do next? Jonathan? King f5, of course. We couldn't move straightly to f5 because the bishop is on d4 that controls black squares. That's why we had that route. g7. Shan? I told you, nobody's sleeping. The only move you have here, and you're thinking.
King to f5.
Okay, thank you very much. If you move the king, then I will promote. Bishop b3, of course.
Oh.
You were sleeping. That's why I asked you. So, after bishop b3, if I move the pawn, Jimmy, and okay, it doesn't want to move, but let's calculate in the mind. h6.
G3. I mean G6.
King g6. Bishop e3.
King H7.
King h7, king g5. Why is it draw? Because your king and the bishop controls which square, Jonathan?
E8.
G8, and the bishop can always protect which pawn, Azim? B5.
Five.
So, two weaknesses that we have in the position with black. G8 and B5 can be protected. So, if the king moves to the pawn, which is on b5, then the bishop protects the pawn from c4. If the king moves to f8 to promote g-pawn, then both the king and the bishop protect the g8 square. So even in these positions, when you have pawns on opposite sides, on both sides, the draw can be possible. So that's why, of course, bishop endgames, I think they are not that complicated than the rook endgames. I think we can calculate more, like in our mind, because rook endgames, they are more complicated.
Can you start this one from the beginning again?
Sure. Again, the rule with what we started. We started with the fortress, but that was easy. And we tried to answer the question, what is fortress and the bishop's endgames? It's trying to fortress is controlling the squares that your opponent cannot control. But by controlling these squares, you stop your opponent's pawns. And your opponent cannot help his pawns by his pieces, right? Okay, so what we learned from today's lecture? We learned about fortress in the bishop endgames. We learned how to make draw when the pawns are on the fifth or on the fourth rank, right? Bishop and two pawns against the bishop. We learned what happens when the pawns are on the sixth rank, when the king is in the corner and when the king is in the center. And we learned a little bit about the rook endgames, about the elevator and Latker's idea.